So section D is asking us to answer some problems here with respect to the content of the course. So why don't we hop right in? In our first question, we see that we've got Ruben, who's a lawyer, and Anna, who's come to him for advice. Anna was short of money and Ruben convinced her that he'd continue to act for her if she transferred the title of her house to him. Anna's sister finds out and is furious. Apply the principle from Johnson and Buttress to determine whether or not the contract could be declared void. So our first clue in this particular case is that we're told we've got to decide whether or not the contract could be declared void. So hopefully you'll know that this has to be a contract question, okay? That's coming from the question itself. You'll also notice that what we have here is a case that will help us identify where it's from, Johnson and Buttress. Now, we could go all the way through all the materials on contract, but it says that it'll be declared void, which means there must be a contract in place, right, if it's going to be declared void. That means it's not about agreement, intent, or consideration. Instead, it's probably going to be around lack of consent. Because if we have a lack of consent, then the contract might not be enforceable. It might be able to be declared void. So we've got to think about this problem and say, is there any mistake, duress, undue influence, or unconscionability? Well, there doesn't appear to be a mistake. If we think about the particular problem that we're dealing with, right? It doesn't look like there's any mistake by Anna here. It actually looks like Ruben's doing something that's influencing her. Okay, so it's probably going to be here in either duress, undue influence, and unconscionability. And we could go in and have a deeper look at those if we weren't sure. I'm pretty clear it's not duress, right? We're threatening harm to someone, right? He's not threatening her harm. Maybe economic harm, but I don't think that's really it. How about undue influence? A relationship where one party has dominance and takes advantage of it. There's our case, Johnson and Buttress. Okay, so we've found the particular area of law that we're interested in to answer this particular question. So what we're going to do, well, the way I would approach it, is to use an actual ILAC. Okay, so let me go back to our exam question and think about what we've got. What's the issue here? Well, the issue, if we know that this is a Johnson and Buttress undue influence, right? If we actually know that it's about undue influence, then the issue is, has Ruben used undue influence in the contract with Anna? Okay, so that's the issue. What will help us answer it is the law of undue influence. Often I find it useful to actually explain what the law is. So in particular for undue influence, we're interested in the situation where one party, through a pre-existing relationship, has influence over the other and takes advantage of that dominance such that the other party is not exercising independent judgment. So what we're really saying here is that one party isn't really agreeing, right? They're not using independent judgment. So that's when we have it. So application, right? In this case, R does have a pre-existing relationship because he is Anna's lawyer. Okay, so see again, I've mixed some of the words from the law, pre-existing relationship, with some facts. So I'm using the people and I'm using the position that we actually are talking about. Since this is a lawyer-client relationship, there's a presumption that R has used undue influence. Okay, because that's the way the law works in certain kinds of relationships, and our handy-dandy hint sheet here actually tells us that the lawyer-client relationship is one of those relationships. Then it's presumed or assumed that they did use it. Okay, so that means Reuben is going to have to show that he didn't use undue influence. Okay, so since this is a lawyer-client relationship, there's a presumption that R has used undue influence. It would be very difficult to rebut this on the facts, as he has had Anna transfer her house title to him. Now, your home is a pretty important thing. A lot of money, right? And it doesn't look like he is giving equal value, right? So it really does look like a very unfair kind of relationship. Conclusion, it's likely that A can have the contract declared void for undue influence. Okay. So just bear in mind the way that I'm using legal words through my answer, the lawyer-client relationship, a presumption, and I'm also trying to make sure I mix them with the facts of the case, that the people, yeah? So I'm using those legal words like rebut this, and I'm also putting the rebuttal in the context of the actual facts of the case here. Okay, so that would be question 1 out of the way. In question 2 here, we see Brendan wanted to buy a book from Bruce. Okay, so I'm just going to make a few notes. Brendan wants to buy a book from Bruce. Brendan wanted to buy, so Brendan offered to buy it for $200, to which Bruce replied, "Don't be silly, I wouldn't sell it for less than $1,000. Brendan responded, "You're dreaming." Yep. However, later that day, Brendan saw the same book advertised for eBay, so he called Bruce back and said, "You've got a deal." Okay. Okay, so yes, okay, this, even just looking at those facts, that looks like an agreement problem, right? So you got people making offers and accepting, so it looks like agreement. Let's look what the question actually asks us. Apply the principle from Hyde and Wrench to determine if there is a binding contract, right? Notice this, if there is a contract, not question 1 asked us whether the contract could be declared void. So it means there is a contract that we want to get out of. In this one, it's is there a contract? And hopefully you remember that to have a contract, you've got to have agreement, intent, and consideration. So I'm really looking for this case, Hyde and Wrench, in our materials around something there. I already think that based upon all of these offers, that it's somewhere in agreement, even if I'm not sure about the specific area. So if I go to week 8, which is about agreement, and we have an offer, definition, what it is, what it can be made to, the response, it can be accepted or rejected, Hyde and Wrench. Okay. Hyde and Wrench is in here as our particular case. Okay, so I am here in terms of offer. So the issue is, has there been agreement between Brendan and Bruce? So to do that, I've actually got to work out what is an offer and what is acceptance. Okay, so let's work out Hyde and Wrench. Hyde and Wrench actually states that a counteroffer is a rejection of the original offer. Okay. And therefore, any original offer is off the table. Now, in some ways, this isn't probably directly applicable here, because what we have first is an offer from Brendan to Bruce for $200. Okay. That is then rejected by Bruce. We could say that Bruce's reply is an offer to sell for $1,000, but it's probably more like transmitting information. That, when he says here, when Brendan then says you're dreaming, it's actually a rejection of that offer. Okay, so I don't think then that he can supposedly accept this offer by Bruce, even if that was still a live offer. Okay, so in our answer, what we could say is once an offer is rejected, it can't be revived. Therefore, when Brendan tells Bruce you're dreaming, he is actually rejecting the offer. If it ever was one, to sell for $1,000. That means Brendan's statement you've got a deal is at best an offer to buy for $1,000. This is not accepted yet. So there is no agreement. Conclusion. And what's our question asked again? We've been asked, is there a binding contract? Conclusion, there is no binding contract. Okay, so that's a little bit tricky because the principle in Hyde and Wrench of counteroffer probably isn't exactly on the money here, but what we can see is the clear principle that there's this idea of rejection occurring by Brendan of the offer, which means you can't accept it then. That offer is off the table.